if basic concepts are not in place or they're not aligned with the prophetic worldview, which is what education is all about ultimately. So when you talk about learning Islam, when you talk about becoming educated in Islam, it's about aligning yourself with a particular way of looking at the world. That's the baseline. What's very interesting is there's an amazing hadith from Sayyidah Aisha. She has a statement, and it's also the same from Sayyidina Abdullah bin Mas'ud and other Sahaba. But she says something very interesting. Sayyidah Aisha, she says she used to say, تعلمنا الإيمان قبل أن تعلمنا القرآن فإذا تعلمنا القرآن ازددنا إيمانا. There's different variations, different wording, and each specific unique wording gives you more insight into what she's actually saying. In this particular version of the narration, she says that we were taught, or we learnt from the Prophet ﷺ, we learnt Iman before we learnt the Quran. And the scholars now talk about what does that mean, right? So some of the scholars will commentate on this statement, and in light of her other statements that are similar meaning, what she means by that is that we learnt core concepts, ideas, worldviews before we learnt the Sharia, ahkam, the do's and the don'ts, and the halals and the harams, and so on and so forth, before we learnt that. And then she says, because we did it in that order, and it's very interesting because she's talking about an approach to tarbiyah, she's talking about an approach to spiritually developing and nurturing oneself. So she says, because we did it in that particular order, Iman before Quran, principles before specific rulings, right? Worldviews before practices. Because we did it in that order, when we did learn the rulings, when we did learn the Sharia, when we did learn the rulings of the Quran, izdadna imana. It always increased us in the depth and the profundity of our iman, right? In other words, when you do it in this particular way, what happens is knowledge and education, it increases you in faith when you do it in this particular way. When you learn how to align yourself with particular worldviews, right? So education ultimately, if things are shifting outwardly, like you're doing your prayer better and you're doing your salah, your zakat better and your sawm better, that's good and there's reward in that and it's required. But if things are not shifting here inside the mind and the heart, right? If in other words, if the way that we look at the world remains exactly the same, it's not really an education.